Let us now move on to the keynote speaker. We have the pleasure of having a philosopher and professor of Bonn University, Professor Markus Gabriel, as the keynote speaker. He's going to talk about escalating world division and the era of ethical capitalism. Let us now welcome Professor Markus Gabriel.
Well, thank you, Hiroshima Governor Yuzaki Shiji, for inviting me. It's a huge pleasure and honor. Thank you, Ninami-san, for having me, and also the members of the executive committee of this excellent and important forum. Minasana-sama.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am greatly honored to be given this opportunity to address you at this historical place. I stand before you deeply humbled with awe towards history. Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a place where humanity was devastated by its own destructive force. With deep respect to our ancestors, I stand here in front of you to remember their memories. I'm grateful to be given this opportunity to speak about peace and ways to overcome the big division which we are facing today. Since coming to Japan regularly, I have learned how social responsibility has played an important role for years in the Japanese society. The ethical tradition based on your wonderful culture is deeply rooted in your society. There was an awakening for me when I was visiting Tokyo last year. When I was at the Buddhist cemetery in Roppongi, the skyscrapers in Tokyo seemed to me like a giant temple cemetery. Based on its religious and spiritual tradition, Japan has nurtured its culture of memory. Such memory includes the terrifying tragedy which occurred in Hiroshima. Science showed its fangs against humanity. Our physical understanding of nature became the source of destruction. It is arrogant to pass an ethical judgment on Hiroshima and Nagasaki with just a short preface. Whatever the historical interpretation might be, dropping of the A-bomb has left an ethical scar in human history. Thus, I am deeply grateful that Hiroshima continues to engage and lead in the endeavors towards peace and nuclear disarmament. Hiroshima continued to make important contributions to peace building. For example, the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum, the Peace Declaration by the Mayor, Mayors for Peace Network, and this Hiroshima Business Forum for Global Peace are some examples. I am honored to have been a part of such an important set of activities myself.
Japan has a noble mission to present its tradition of peace, stability, and social harmony, which have been praised and respected by the world. It is not coincident that the ethical capitalism was conceived by me in this very place in Japan, and it is now resonated in the world. Capitalism can bring about peace and contribute to solving the problems, but this is only true when it is rooted in the values. This is indeed the critical key point. Today, I will be speaking in English. My Japanese is not fluent enough to deliver the lecture, but I will continue to practice Japanese language because Japanese language, your mother tongue, shakes my heart so deeply. Thank you.
To my talk, Escalating World Division and the Era of Ethical Capitalism, and given former Prime Minister Kishida's presence here, let me emphasize how the idea was actually born when I had the honor and pleasure of visiting Keidanren and heard of the former Prime Minister's notion of new capitalism, Atarashi Shihonshugi, and I thought, okay, how can we give life to the idea of new capitalism? What could be new about capitalism? And as you will see, I will elaborate precisely on the idea that the governor and the excellent committee proposed, namely the idea of a positive cycle, or as you will see, I will speak of moral progress in this respect. So here's the structure of today's keynote. In the first part, I will tell you what I think ethics is. If I speak of ethical capitalism, I better tell you what ethics is. In the second part, I will talk about the era of ethical capitalism and respond to the question what capitalism is. Then we know what ethics and capitalism is and how we can combine them. And finally, I will talk about the dangerous phenomenon of polarization and propose measures of how we can counter the escalating division and contribute to peacemaking, which, as I've also said in my few opening remarks, is one of the most important missions of this country and its significant, very important business world. So, part one of my keynote, what is ethics after all? So, ethics is a sub-discipline of scientific philosophy. As any other scientific discipline, ethics is about something. What ethics is about, its target system, as we say in philosophy, are the moral facts. So let me tell you what the moral facts are. In general, a fact is a true answer to a meaningfully posed question. So here's a very simple, meaningfully posed question. Who is the governor of Hiroshima? And we know him. He's fortunately here. And so there's one and only one true answer to the question who the governor of Hiroshima is. So it is a fact that there is a governor of Hiroshima, that he's here, etc. That's a fact. Side note to our American friends, there are no alternative facts. They are just facts. The idea of an alternative fact is just utterly meaningless. A moral fact now is a true answer to a meaningfully posed ethical question. So that's a moral fact. Here's a very simple example of a moral fact. Imagine it's a hot summer day due to climate crisis. As we all know, they are getting hotter. And now you face a choice. You see that a child is drowning in shallow water, and your choice is now between saving the child, but then your drink gets warm, the ice melts, or you run to the drink and the child dies. Now, what do you ought to do? If you hesitate and think twice, you have a problem. So this is what the great philosopher Bernard Williams called the one thought to many argument. You had one thought too many. Of course, you ought to save the child. That is a moral fact. Hence, a true answer to a meaningfully posed ethical question. Now, what is ethics about more narrowly? So I think ethics has three dimensions. The first dimension of ethics is what I call humanism. Moral facts are about human duties. Sometimes when European philosophers speak about ethics, we are accused of Eurocentrism. So here is just evidence that the idea of humanism is much older than European modern philosophy in any way. So it's a famous quote from the Chinese philosopher Mangzi, but you will also obviously find this in all the Japanese traditions, in all the African philosophical traditions, which are again older than the Asian philosophical traditions. So if you look at all those traditions, you will find this idea. And the example of the drowning child you find in Mangzi, but before climate change. But the example is the same. And there you see, most of you can read the characters, and they say, right, you're not even human if you cannot distinguish between good and evil. It's a human, remarkable feature. Now, the second dimension of ethics is what I call realism. So moral facts are norms. If you violate them, right, then there might or might not be political sanctions, but definitely you fall in one of the categories of either getting the moral facts right or getting them wrong, like any other ordinary fact. That's what I call realism. And the third dimension is very important. I call universalizing rather than universalism. That is something I have learned from conversations with Japanese philosophers to use this term of universalizing. Let's just go back to this very simple example of the drowning child. So it doesn't matter who you are and who the child is, you still need to save it. If we replace the drowning child, right, so imagine there's a constellation where Zelensky is saving a Russian child, then Zelensky has to save the Russian child, and Putin has to save the Ukrainian child. Or to use an unfortunately very concrete example, one must never throw rockets at kindergarten or university or hospital facilities, regardless of the context. So it doesn't matter who does it. You can replace the agents, you know who I'm talking about. Throwing rockets at kindergarten facilities is evil, regardless of who's doing it. That's the idea of universalizing. Moral facts are valid for every person under every circumstance. That's the third dimension of ethics. Now, ethics is not stable. Unfortunately, we cannot just rely on a set of simple, evident moral facts like the one I have laid out, because we do not have the same type of evident, simple answer to questions such as, which AI systems should we build? How do we achieve peace under highly complex negotiation conditions? Which types of tariffs are morally correct and which are morally wrong? These questions can only be answered if we are capable of complex insight into socioeconomic conditions. So we need a notion of what I call moral progress, which corresponds, as you will see when I come to economics, to the idea of the positive cycle that we already heard this morning. So moral progress, in general, is the large-scale institutional recognition of hitherto partially obscured moral facts. Another very simple example, the female vote. We used to have democracies without female vote, but then we recognized that there's something wrong with a democracy where women can't vote. So that's basic feminism. And moral progress is the institutional recognition of the fact, meaning we do have the female vote. That's an example of moral progress. And there are many such examples, and many of those examples, and you will see that capitalism is an engine precisely of moral progress, result from business activity. So I think, or I propose to think, of business as a moral innovation lab. I believe that ethics, the scientific discipline of philosophy, relates to the business world exactly like physics relates to a particle accelerator. So physics makes progress because they can test their theories. Ethics makes progress because we can test our theories. The testing ground of ethical theories is the business world. This is how I think we relate to each other in a positive cycle where academia, business, and policymakers cooperate with the goal of moral progress. That's the basic liberalism of modernity. If you give this up, you will see later, you're giving up democracy itself. That's the engine of modern democracy. In short, values are the new oil of mature economies. Japan is a wonderful example of what economists now call a mature economy. Mature economies, Germany is in a very similar situation, share similar problems, demographic change, for instance, right? Or polarization, or new technologically related risks. And data are the new oil of our economy because data express human values. Data are valuable because in data, humans manifest who they are, right? Remember the original business model of Facebook. People show their face. They show who they are and who they want to be. Those are the valuable data. And now the question is, how do you deal with these values, with these data in a responsible manner? But that's the idea that values are the new oil, and therefore data are the new oil of mature economies. Values first, data are expressions of values, and thus valuable in the economic and the ethical sense at the same time. This is, by the way, a wonderful recent conversation book I highly recommend. Many of you know Sawada-san, a major leader of the Japanese business world, and the other person is Takahiro Nakajima sensei, a colleague of mine from the University of Tokyo, with whom I have been talking about these issues now for almost a decade. So let's come to another challenge we are all facing, given that I just said data or values are the new oil. I'm already approaching the issue of artificial intelligence, which will assume center stage in the third part of my keynote. So what is artificial intelligence? I think artificial intelligence is non-biological intelligence. It's currently silicon-based intelligence. So what's intelligence? So the artificial is not hard to define. It's what technology leaders produce. Intelligence is a measure of problem solving. So a system is intelligent or more intelligent than another system if it solves the same problem faster. Capitalism is a very intelligent problem-solving system and arguably more intelligent than any other mode of production we have ever seen, but I'll get to that. We can also define learning, because we currently have systems which are capable of learning in positive feedback loops. So learning is the replacement of one problem by a better one. Learning is not solving a problem, it's shifting the problem space. That's what learning is about. And our intelligence tools help us to learn by providing us with better problem spaces, outsourcing boring labor, for instance, and therefore opening new problem spaces for us and increasing efficiency. Wisdom, and that's the highest notion, I say as a philosopher, is to identify the right problems. So which problems do you want to solve with which technology? The technology cannot tell you which are the right problems to solve. That is forever up to humans because technology serves wisdom. Wisdom is higher. We currently do not have wise intelligence as a technology, but that is also reason to try to build it. I'm not saying it's impossible to do. I'm saying that we need a new stage of AI development, a huge business opportunity. I'm thinking about this with some colleagues here also in Japan. For instance, there you see in the upper left corner, Yasu Deguchi-sensei from Kyoto University, who has coined the term of the we-turn, or the fellowship model. That is the idea that together with artificial intelligence, we can increase our wisdom and not just our efficiency. So AI, in short, is smart, but not wise yet. And that's part of the problem of our contemporary moment. So how can ethics advance? So here's a wonderful proposal where East meets West, and in this case, my colleague from my university meeting the former Pope as well. They have been discussing this, and this has led to very interesting initiatives also in the Vatican. The notion of concrete ethics and kyosei in Japanese means, of course, symbiosis. And the Latin word concrete comes from growing together. So two systems can grow together, and they can grow together. And Christiane Wopen's idea is that we can measure ethical success in light of the conditions of life for every system involved, including, obviously, the environment and human society. ESGP would be a way of measuring concrete ethics, thus understood. And there's a whole global movement on all continents which calls this the New Enlightenment. In the Age of the Living, there you see a book by the French philosopher Corinne Pellichon precisely about that. We can learn how to organize our businesses and our economies also from evolutionary biology. The discipline of evonomics combines precisely insight into the structure and success conditions of life and the growing of our economies. So there's a reason why Japan is very good in its relationship to nature and at least equally good in its business world, right? So cultivating nature and doing business is the same type of activity because, quite simply, humans are animals, after all. Now I come to capitalism in order to fuse them. Second part, the era of ethical capitalism. So, what is capitalism? So I think capitalism is a set of three impressive achievements. The first achievement is freedom of contract. That is, capitalism is not feudalism. And that's the negative freedom of capitalism. We negotiate contracts, and nobody can force anybody in capitalist societies to do a job for them with legal measures, right? But not by way of slavery or feudalism. So that's the first modern achievement, which came after the European bourgeois revolutions. The second major achievement, without which we don't have capitalism, is a market economy. And here a market economy is just not a planned economy. So careful with industrial policies. Government and business need to cooperate in such a way that we always increase the freedom of market and not reduce it, right? For that reason, because it's another achievement of modern capitalism. We are not in planned economies, and we have seen them historically, and we have studied them scientifically. We know they do not work. It's one of those facts, very important facts. Planned economies of scale do not work. And the third, most creative part of capitalism is the existence of reinvestable private property. That's the positive freedom of the entrepreneur. So you decide which business model to create, and you take the risks in order to reinvest the private property that you have. And in capitalist societies, everybody does this in one way or another, because basically everybody has, say, a bank account, and just the decision, where you have your bank account and what to do with it is precisely that, an entrepreneurial activity of investing and reinvesting your private property. This will be crucial. Now, ethical capitalism adds a new condition, namely that we ought to create value, economic growth, through ethical insight. So I will go into detail in a moment, but very simply, if ethics allows us to identify problems that all humans share, say sustainability, inequality, peace, and we identify business measures to solve those problems, then economic success is guaranteed. If you solve the energy problem, don't worry about being rich, right? You will not know where to invest your money. If you solve inequality, if you solve peace, you will make a lot of money. One of the reasons why some presidents are trying desperately to achieve peace in order to make money from it. Nothing wrong with that, right? But you still have to achieve peace first, and the best way is by way of business. So another very important lesson about capitalism is that capitalism is, and here I quote the great economist Joseph Schumpeter, is a form or method of economic change. Capitalism is change management because human problems constantly change, in light of economic success. So only because of economic progress and technological progress do we have artificial intelligence. And only because we have artificial intelligence do we get a new type of digital economy. So capitalism is precisely an engine of economic change, or as Schumpeter called it, creative destruction. So something is destroyed so that something new can be born. Again, life, kyosei. That's capitalism, a form of economic change. A very simple example that is happening right now. We are moving, to a certain extent, from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Again, a gigantic market, huge business opportunities, and an opportunity for more progress, sustainability. That's why we want it, right? That's why it's on the flag of contemporary capitalism, because ethical insight into our relationship to nature is a driver of economic growth. Change is part of capitalism. It's not a static model. It constantly changes and is about managing the change and harnessing the energy of change. That's what we do. Here's something which I really like about my country. We have a great text of the Constitution. And what we say in Germany, it's called the social market economy, but I'm saying we need something even more than that. But these are some beautiful paragraphs. It says, property, and I'll get to private property now, and the right of inheritance shall be guaranteed. Their content and limits shall be determined by the laws. And most importantly, property entails obligations. So that's written into our Constitution. That is part of the German response to the catastrophes of the Second World War. Property entails obligations, and German post-war capitalism is, of course, a response precisely to the totalitarian regime of National Socialism, which was not quite a capitalist free market economy, to say the least. So property entails obligations. So here's a long quote, but I just give you the thought by Deborah Setz, professor of ethics and society at Stanford University. And in the quote, she just points out that markets only work, the positive freedom of capitalism, if private property is guaranteed. But in order to guarantee private property, we need laws. And the laws are collectively owned by the people. That's what democracy is. We collectively own the laws that our policymakers then put to practice and reality. So there's collective property, namely the laws, and then thanks to the laws, there's private property. So that's the function of the state in a functioning capitalist society. There's precisely no opposition between state and market. That's a wrong thought. State and market are in no way in tension or in opposite. They cooperate in a functioning capitalist society because the state passes laws that are good for economic growth and moral progress at the same time in a positive cycle. So that's the summary of the quote. Or as she puts it, true laissez-faire is not even logically possible. She wrote that before the Doge department was in existence, but that's also a reminder to the Doge activity. True laissez-faire, absolute deregulation is not capitalism. In short, something that I worry about right now as a European is that our American friends are not capitalist enough. So we need more capitalism in America. I think that's important to point out because that is capitalism and not deregulation. Deregulation is sometimes the right measure, sometimes it's not, but capitalism is not that. So let's dig our heels a little deeper into some very recent interesting developments in economic theory. So there's this wonderful book by Colin Mayer at the Said Business School in Oxford, Capitalism and Crises, How to Fix Them. And Colin Mayer has shown that empathy is the true invisible hand in functioning markets. So markets function because of soft power, the soft power of negotiation, decency, soft power, sustainable relationships, fairness govern markets despite the fact that, of course, there are tough negotiations. Of course, there are interests and clashes of interests, but clashes of interest get resolved in functioning markets because, to quote Colin Mayer, in capitalism, entrepreneurs help others to help others to help others. He calls this the moral law. It's a cycle of mutual aid. And he shows that this was the original idea of Adam Smith, the famous invisible hand. So this quote, again by Elon Musk, sorry for bringing him up, the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy, is, to use one of my favorite Japanese gestures, wrong. So that's why he got an X by me. Oh, he owns X, but anyhow, so X by me back to him. So capitalism and crisis, empathy is not a weakness, and it's also, again, not an invention of Western civilization. Eastern civilization was there before, just to mention the obvious Buddhism, and Buddhism is based on empathy, so this is historically inaccurate and economically false. So should we take these considerations seriously? And then I come to peacemaking. Well, Nobel Prize 2024. It was a very good Nobel Prize year, also here in Japan, talking about peacemaking and Hidankyo, of course, because a Nobel Prize was awarded for deep insight into the structure of political economy. In the famous book, Why Nations Fail, the 3 Nobel Prize winners have shown that institutional stability, moral progress, is constitutive of economic success. So only societies that manage to harvest the power of moral progress and institutional structure are economically viable. So we're currently seeing also economic evidence on global stage for that. And the next stage is a debate which also started in Stanford about a moral political economy. I highly recommend this short little booklet by Margaret Levi and Federica Carugati, which was produced in Stanford at the Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Science. But here again, Japan was actually historically first, which I recently learned. So Uzawa has, of course, shown this with the level of a mathematical genius already a long time ago. So there's Japanese economics came first, and now we are catching up. So I always recommend Uzawa after now starting reading him, though heavy-duty mathematics, but still read it. And this is a great book where you can get his ideas in a summarized way. He was also one of the first to show how ecology is important for a functioning society, path-breaking work. So not every future is desirable, I think this one isn't. I prefer that one. This is the book presentation of ethical capitalism with, oh, this guy, who happens to have very good philosophy counselors, but let's skip that and come to peace. We live in an era of polarization and escalating division. So the question is, how can we make peace, which, as I've been saying, is one of the most important duties, in particular, of this country, for all the reasons that bring us together here today. In the background, you see an ethical AI agent I have been designing with an AI company called the Alpha Buddha. So polarization, or which is the driver of escalating division of our societies, is a network effect. So we now have good evidence how social networks, under the conditions in which they currently function, necessarily produce, without the intention of anybody, polarization. It's a network effect. So for those of you who are interested in this, the great economist Kenneth Arrow already showed this in the 1970s, that if you have large-scale collectives where everybody can talk to each other and influence each other rapidly, then you undermine the quality of a democracy. It's Arrow's theorem. It's an interesting paradox. So democracy paradoxically works better if we don't talk too much to each other. So the question is, how can we redesign our digital infrastructure to avoid polarization? And here you still have an advantage in Japan because your public sphere is not yet polarized in the same way as it now is in Europe and as it certainly is in the United States of America. So you still have time, I believe, but you need to hurry up to create depolarization tools. Again, a huge market because this can be done digitally with the help of AI. So that's a network effect. And I'm arguing now that we can start a movement which I call depolarization by design. We can design depolarization tools. And I think that's the best way of dealing with the problem of social networks. It's not regulation and taxation alone. I'm not saying don't tax the social networks, but that's a political question. The more interesting question is, how can we design social networks, and we want social networks, that do not generate polarization? It's a design question. It's a wonderful task for business. Create new social networks that do not have the same type of problems. Here's a wonderful book about also how to do this by a Swiss economist just out, Guardrails, where he shows very concretely how we can design AI systems that are not subject to the logic of polarization. So that's one thing that we can do, create new business models, right, that come in and make peace online, apart from the highly complex negotiation conditions that we face on the geopolitical scale. We can also build ethical AI agents. I will give you an example of what we are doing with my team right now, and I call this project Deep Innovation. So deep innovation consists in bringing business, philosophy, science, and policymakers together to identify democracy and thus capitalism-enhancing digital tools, such as the Alpha Buddha or what we call the Gandhi bots. Gandhi bots are peacemaking engines that you can use in social networks, just like there are bad bots, Russian and North Korean bots. We can easily design good bots. Why is nobody doing this? We call them the Gandhi bots, right? And then you just send the Gandhi bots into the network. Absolutely no problem to design this. Again, gigantic business potential. Design Gandhi bots. So here's another wonderful example. I get to where this is coming from, but there's more where this is coming from, of course. The big NTT initiative, ION. NTT is, of course, paradigmatic and was paradigmatic in creating a very important network infrastructure in this country. And now NTT is working on a different photonic infrastructure, which needs philosophical reflection. I'll get to that. I have the honor of advising not NTT directly, but the Kyoto Institute of Philosophy, which is working on exactly this structure. How can we design a new social infrastructure for Japan using the best technology out there and the strong network structure that you have, such as NTT, Hitachi, and many, many other major companies which are precisely in that business. A second example, that's something that I'm creating currently with a new company. We founded an AI-powered social knowledge network, which we will launch next year. And there you see up there, we will recreate a version of what used to be Twitter, but under completely different conditions. Content moderation, verified users, no feeds, no ads. So just a network that corresponds to the kinds of things we know from game theory, political economy, etc. No problem to design a high-level new type of network. I won't tell you the business case for this, but there is one. And I hope it's fair to be discussed. And in particular, we are designing the system based on European technology in this case, but for, by, and with people in the so-called Global South. I prefer to speak of the majority world to point out that most people belong to what's called the Global South. But if you want to use the category of the Global South, then I think that we, the Global North, owe something to the so-called Global South, such as producing, depolarizing, and knowledge-enhancing tools that allow people to connect and create new types of business. Not the paternalizing attitude of development, of course, but full support on eye level. Again, we can do this in the digital age better than ever before. Wonderful business opportunity for all of us and an opportunity for moral progress. So here are just some upcoming threats, and then I'll conclude. So in the age of AI, where we're currently living, something else is already on the horizon, namely quantum computing, which looks like it's scalable rather soon. And as we have seen with these developments, given that significant investment is going into quantum computing, both the development of technology and the academic research, we can expect this to happen sooner rather than later. Now, I just visited some major companies that work on this, and they get worried that we might create a quantum artificial intelligence that would be able to generate objects out of thin air. So just like quantum mechanics, the universe came out of thin air, quantum fluctuation. And now imagine you have an artificial intelligence system that operates on the quantum level. So it could, in principle, right, that is a possible risk, generate four-dimensional objects and make Terminator real. So I'm saying this is only mildly mad, so let's not fully pursue this. But what's real is cybersecurity in the age of quantum cryptography. So imagine we make it to nuclear fusion, which again is a possibility. It's deeper in the future, but again, a lot of money is going there for good reasons. But then we need an entirely new type of security infrastructure, because quantum computers will destroy your security like a warm knife goes through butter. So a problem that the fastest computer right now takes about 100,000 years to solve, such as getting all my passwords, will take 20 seconds, that's the scale, once we have quantum computers. And now imagine we have a nuclear fusion infrastructure and quantum computers, then we have a very serious problem. So that's something we need to prepare for right now, look into the future. So, because things are speeding up, which is what philosophers call accelerationism, thanks to artificial intelligence, but quantum computing will again bring us an entirely new social velocity. In short, what to do? Okay, and so here's what philosophers are now trying to sell you, hopefully soon globally. Bring philosophers in as future makers. I call this the chief philosophy officer, or ethicon, the ethical consultant. So harness the power of philosophy, the humanities and social sciences. Geopolitics and geoeconomics is highly prominently represented here for a good reason. Because insight into the apparently softer factors has huge consequences for business. And that's the function of the humanities and social sciences in a modern capitalist society. Give us also insight into the transcultural conditions, how to do business with each other, right? So I had the honor of traveling with a group of Japanese business people and German thinkers to India recently. And in order to manage that territory, you can imagine that you need a very serious level of transcultural insight. Right? So it's not enough that humans get together, you need cultural insight. Traveling to Japan, you better bring a bunch of Japanologists, because it's a highly complex social society, social system, and you need to understand that the better you do, the better your business, and vice versa. So that's my recommendation. So coming to peace and closing with this important topic here, I worked a lot with a bunch of AI systems to generate a nice Terminator. So that's the nice Terminator. So imagine we will build a fully AI-powered robot, most likely here in Japan, either in Osaka or in Hiroshima, which is also a booming scientific development place. Then we better get a good Terminator. And so that's how AI imagines a good Terminator after various rounds of prompting. So how can we achieve peace in an age which I call the planetary? Let me briefly tell you what that is. So globalization was the idea that through economic exchange, humanity would just grow together. But then suddenly we faced a much deeper insight into our being embedded in nature. Think of climate change, right? Climate change accelerated due to globalization, which is not a critique of capitalism. It means that we need to find new solutions. And one big thing which happened, and I believe we still underestimate this, is that the pandemic created something which never happened before. Almost all humans on the planet did the same thing at the same time, namely fight a virus. This never happened. All humans, almost all, engaged in the same activity. I call this the grand synchronization. And we currently see how the grand synchronization unleashed new social and economic activities, including, of course, conspiracy theories, but also major investments and ethical capitalism. Think of the vaccine industry and the progress we made thanks to this. In particular, in Germany, BioNTech, which produced the vaccine for Pfizer, had major impact on the region where it's from, the city of Gutenberg, where the press was invented, and the second big thing after the press in this city was BioNTech. So we are moving from the global to the planetary. One Health, another very important investment activity, and connecting people. Here in the city of Hiroshima, yesterday I had the pleasure of learning something also about shipbuilding. And ships connect humans, right? Ships do many things, but they also connect humans. So there, again, another opportunity of how to rethink the grand synchronization under condition of hyper-complex systems. And there's something we all love in Europe about Japanese and Chinese, in this case, same characters, that your word for crisis contains both the risk, the danger, and the opportunity. And I think that's quite important to point out, right? Every crisis, including the hyper-complex geo-economic situation that we're in, contains a good opportunity. And let me conclude by just saying, the goal of all ethics, and thus philosophy, is pacifism. The ending war. That's the goal. There is no ethics of war. Once you have war, the role of ethics is ending war. There is no moral war. Sometimes you ought to defend yourself, and we have the right to self-defense, of course. But there is no ethics of war. The ethics of war is ending war. And I think that is a very, very important message. And I'm particularly pleased and honored to have had the opportunity today of speaking about this here at this eminently important Global Peace Forum in the stunningly beautiful, I saw yesterday, I had the honor of going to Miyashima, a stunningly beautiful town of Hiroshima. Thank you very much for your attention, and let's do something together.
Dr. Markus Gabriel, thank you very much for your keynote lecture. Now, we would like to take a break at this time.